Welcome to Straight Talk Tuesday for August 25th, 2020. In this segment of our Elite Retirement Plan series, we'll be discussing how to minimize your retirement plan liability. I'm Rich Myers, and I'm a retirement plan advisor at Retirement Plans Inc. And this presentation has been put together in conjunction with Brent Bowers, a retirement plan advisor at Retirement Plans Inc. On the agenda for today, we'll be covering three key concepts, which include the biggest source of corporate liability as it relates to the retirement plan, minimizing and eliminating investment liability, and how you can reduce your fee liability as it relates to the 401k, 403b, or other retirement plan. Quick disclaimer, today's presentation is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Let's get started with what the biggest sources of liability are for your company as it relates to the retirement plan. The two biggest sources of liability for your company are fees and investments. The most common litigation for fees includes fees that are not reasonable for the size of the plan which your company has. And then the second most common is going to be utilizing high cost share classes when lower cost institutional share class investments are available. In general, we want to try to keep fees as low as possible. And then on the investment front, the two most common areas of litigation include a plan that's not providing access to low-cost investment options at all. Maybe they only have actively managed funds and no passive or index funds. And then the second most common is going to be investment options that have consistently underperformed the benchmark, and the plan sponsor and the company have continued to include those investments within the 401k or 403b plan. We're starting to see litigation increase again. What you'll notice in the graph on the right is that when the market became very volatile around 2008, litigation increased drastically around 401k plans. And you can now see over the past few years, we're starting to see increased lawsuits being filed against companies as it relates to their retirement plan. And so far in 2020, we're seeing even more of these due to the recent market volatility and market drop. Litigation tends to rise during times of volatile markets and economic uncertainty. Few of the recent lawsuits and settlements, and guys, there's more than I can show here, but I picked a few out. Career Builder actually settled this month, and the lawsuit alleged that the plan had improper investments which were motivated by revenue sharing payments to Morgan Stanley and ADP. So they had higher cost investments that were giving kickbacks to the record keeper and to the advisor. LinkedIn recently had a lawsuit filed against them this month, and that lawsuit alleges that the plan didn't try to reduce their fees or scrutinize investments. And this includes the Fidelity Freedom Target Date funds, which are very popular within 401k plans today. Goldman Sachs actually had a judge refuse to dismiss their lawsuit against their plan in July of this year. The lawsuit alleged that Goldman Sachs kept underperforming in proprietary funds in the plan when there were better performing alternatives available. And then very similarly, Fidelity just settled in July a lawsuit that alleged Fidelity was using its own funds and was keeping revenue sharing and kickbacks from their funds that were built into those Fidelity investment options. Individuals that are most commonly named in these lawsuits, or the most common defendants, includes first and foremost the company, obviously. Then you'll see the C-suite executives, CEO, owner, president, CFO, all being named on the lawsuits. Then we'll see it go down to the human resource team that helps manage the plan, and then the retirement plan committee. So really anybody who has anything to do with the retirement plan these days is getting named in each of these lawsuits. Now let's turn our attention to how we can eliminate this investment liability. I want to start with a definition of fiduciary because we'll talk about this a little bit later on in the presentation. Fiduciary is the highest legal duty of one party to another being bound ethically to act in that other party's best interest. So if somebody's a fiduciary to your plan, they have to act in your best interest. And I wish that I could say everyone in the financial industry has to be a fiduciary, but that's just not the case today. So as you're looking for what your plan has and what level of fiduciary you're working with, we'll call it a good, better, and best case scenario. So the good case would be your advisor assists you in monitoring the 401k investments. Maybe they meet with the plan sponsor and the committee, and they might make some suggestions for the investments, but it's not recommended because the company still retains all the liability for the investment monitoring and selection. Company still signs off on the changes. Really, there's nothing in place that says the advisor is responsible for this portion of the plan. A better scenario would be an advisor who works as a 321 co-fiduciary. This is an advisor that may meet with the plan sponsor and the retirement plan committee to review and make suggestions on the investment lineup. And as long as the committee accepts the recommendations of the advisor, both parties will be liable if the plan ever gets sued. So this is better, but the company still retains a portion of the liability because they're still signing off on the investment changes. The best case scenario, and this is the one that Retirement Plans Inc. acts as, and what we recommend, would be a 338 fiduciary. This is when an advisor has ultimate control over the investment monitoring and selection. They still may meet with the investment committee and the plan sponsor and give them the recommendations and the review, but ultimately the 338 fiduciary is responsible for signing off on all investment changes. So this is best for any company because it completely eliminates the liability of investment monitoring and selection. So how do you know if your plan advisor is a fiduciary? Your advisor will provide you with a contract that states that they are indeed a fiduciary and in what capacity they are a fiduciary. It might say they're a 321, in which case the company is still partially liable. It might say, hey, we're going to give you recommendations, but ultimately you retain 100% of the liability here. Or it might spell out, we as an advisory firm are taking full responsibility. One key concept or key takeaway here, if you don't have a contract, the liability falls back on your company. So make sure you have a contract in place with your advisor stipulating that they are responsible for the investment monitoring and selection. Let's now discuss ways that we can reduce your liability as it relates to the fees within your retirement plan. And to better do this, we need to first understand the different fees that are incurred by the plan within any given year. The first fee is going to be a record keeper or investment provider fee, which is charged by a company to provide the retirement plan platform, the website, the 800 number, and it's usually charged as a per participant fee or a percentage of assets fee. And a percentage of assets is exactly as it sounds. They might say, hey, we're going to charge you 0.5% on whatever's in the plan. Investment fees, on the other hand, are charged by the actual mutual fund companies to manage the different investments. So these fees can vary based on what investments you make available to your participants. Then you have the advisor fees, which are charged by a consulting firm or an advisory firm for providing your participants with financial education, financial advice, and also assisting you as the plan sponsor in running the plan. These can also be charged as a flat fee, percentage of assets, or per participant fee. And then lastly, we've got the 12B1 and sub-TA fees. Now, these are typically hidden commissions that are built into the investments, and they pay an advisor or a record keeper. They're almost like kickbacks for putting the particular investments on your platform. Let's now move into 3 different ways that we can minimize that fee liability. And the first is going to be utilizing the institutional share class of investments. This provides your participants with the lowest cost investments while avoiding those hidden 12B1 and sub-TA fees. You're going to end up getting a higher investment return on those institutional share class investments than you would on the same investment within a different share class. And now they're available for plans of any size. 5 to 7 years ago, that might not have been the case. But as we sit here today in 2020, we can get those for any plan from a startup all the way up to a Fortune 500 company. This also allows advisors to be more transparent about the fees that they're charging, and you as a plan sponsor to negotiate the fees separately from the actual investment expense. Generally, these institutional share classes are labeled with the letter I, Y, Z, R6, or ADM. And you see a picture out to the left of 2 gallons of milk. And the reason I put this on here is they're the same exact thing. Why pay more for one instead of the other? If you're getting the same exact investment, why should we pay an extra 0.5% when we could get that same investment or that same gallon of milk for a little bit cheaper? The next step here is going to be benchmarking your plan fees. The Department of Labor recommends that you benchmark it at least every 5 years. And I would say if your plan is growing quickly, as many have over the past few years, that you should benchmark it even more frequently than that. So to do this, you want to request proposals from different vendors and compare their fees to your current fees. And if you've not done this or you're not sure how to do it, our firm can help you. We've helped over 100 companies in the past few years benchmark their plan fees, and every single one of them has been able to reduce their fees through that process. You need to consider both quantitative and qualitative factors in your analysis when benchmarking the plan. You don't have to choose the cheapest vendors out there as long as the vendors that you're providing and that you're selecting are giving you a greater value. You also want to make sure that you're using this benchmark to negotiate lower fees with your current vendors. What we're seeing is if you bring your current vendor a benchmark and say, hey, I can go elsewhere and get cheaper fees, they're going to go ahead and lower their fees to match that or at least come closer to what you can get out on the open market. And then you don't have to make any big changes. And then lastly, document, document, document. You want to make sure that you keep and retain your benchmark should you ever need to prove that you've done your due diligence as it relates to the fees within your retirement plan. And lastly, make sure that you're including some passive investment options within your fund lineup. So you've got actively managed funds, which have higher investment expenses, while you've got passive or index investments, which have lower investment expenses. There's no regulation that requires a plan to have a certain number of active or passive funds in any particular fund lineup, but many lawsuits have come from plans that don't offer any passive or index options. So that would be similar to a fund that tracks the S&P 500. There's no active management in it, so it's very low cost, and a participant can invest in it for, let's say, somewhere around 0.02%. versus having to pay an active manager around 0.5% for a similar fund. You also want to go ahead and include these passive investment options because it's going to reduce the likelihood of fee litigation. I would say include at least one passive fund option in each investment category. If you have questions about that, you can reach out to our firm here at Retirement Plans Inc. We can help monitor and see how your fund lineup is stacking up today. A couple of key takeaways here. Number one, ensure your advisor is acting as a fiduciary. And ideally, that's going to be a 338 fiduciary, which completely offloads the liability on you. Number two, benchmark your plan fees regularly. It's been over 8 years now since fee disclosure came out. If you haven't benchmarked your plan in a few years, we highly recommend doing it this year, especially with all the volatility in the market. And then takeaway number three, utilize institutional and low-cost investment options so that your participants don't pay higher fees. They can keep more in their pocket and get better returns for it. Thanks for joining us today. If you have questions about your retirement plan or individual investments, please reach out to myself or Brent Bowers at Retirement Plans Inc. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you next time for Straight Talk Tuesday.